to know who's not present for the minutes? Oh, wait, I should turn this on. We have all commissioners present.
Only two missing, right?
And we have Commissioner Moisen absent and Commissioner Laurel absent at the moment. I would like to remind everybody in the audience and on the dais, if you haven't already done so, please either turn off your cell phone or make sure it's quiet so that we're not disrupted by the meeting. The first item on the agenda is public comment for things that are not on the agenda. Is there any? Seeing none, I will close the public comments on the items not on the agenda. The next thing is the consent calendar, and the obvious error was that the commissioners that were absent were all the ones that were present.
Well, not to mention that John Baer is both present and absent in the minutes. And in fact, I was the one who was absent.
Right.
You fess up.
I fess up.
Okay.
And so was,
So
I was
that,
absent, too.
yeah.
so,
So with those.
So noted.
So noted.
so.
Is there any other corrections?
Well, I'm concerned about the use of English language in the item 2, third paragraph, last sentence at the bottom, that we would need such a policy applied to each property rather than piecemeal to make a comprehensive change. All right, it's kind of awkward, but I guess it's close enough to English that it will pass. Motion to approve.
Second?
I can't, I wasn't there. She wasn't there either. You
So
get
do
to-
I get to second it?
You can.
And then-
Anybody can. I mean,
But the
those
thing
not
is,
present-
you need how many to pass the motion? If
just a
two-
majority of those present as to form, because those that were here are vouching for it.
Okay. But we're not a majority.
We don't have a majority unless,
You don't need
Unless
a
Mr.
majority of
Moisen is
those-
coming right through
you
the
need a
door at this
majority-
moment.
Yes!
Yes!
You need a majority of those present tonight to act on it.
But we don't have a majority.
You do, you have 4.
3.
You don't need a majority of those present at the meeting.
No, but 2 of them would have abstained.
They don't have, this is what I'm saying.
We
they
don't
don't have
have
to.
to.
In
They
this
don't have
case,
to,
we are
they can
requesting
approve
that they
as
not
to form.
abstain,
Okay.
in the interests of justice.
We're talking about the minutes, and there's a motion on the floor to approve the minutes, which has been second, and we were just commenting there were 2 people that were not present, so they would like to abstain. However, that doesn't give us a majority. But now with you here, now we have a majority.
Just want to make it a point after
Well, you
6
need
and a
to
half
turn on
years,
your-
this is the first time that I've been late.
Put your mic on.
Put your
and say
mic
it
on,
again.
and then you can say
For the
whatever you
record.
like. For the record.
For the record, okay. So are we approving the minutes?
Correct,
Yes.
unless you had any corrections.
Okay, so I'm a yay.
Okay.
Sorry.
All in favor?
Yay.
Abstain,
Any no? Any abstaining?
abstain.
What are you doing?
I'll abstain.
2 abstentions.
Okay.
Wait, the motion
So,
carries 302.
302.
Which gets us into our discussion items. The first one is bulk mass with regard to development review. And I'm assuming that's why all these pieces of paper are up here with the different code sections, David? Help me
Yes, I just
steer.
thought I would provide a little context for that discussion item. This item's brought, was at the commission's pleasure.
So do you want me to give the history of why I brought that up?
Yes.
So when I spoke with city council members about what things they were, I won't say concerned about, but had I guess concerns, was one of which was that we were being subjective of things rather than being objective. And one of the things when we did the Loyola Corners was we said bulk and mass, but nobody defined what that meant. And so what we wanted to make sure was that we all as commissioners understood that, have this conversation, what are we going to say when we know that the building is not appropriate, but we need to describe it in ways that can be more definitive so that the builder understands what we're saying. Does that help with the context?
Yeah, and that's, it was really just providing the context for the commission that rests with our design findings and really just talks about bulk in terms of the building's relationship to the immediate area, in terms of the other structures in the immediate area. And then certain zoning, our zoning districts have design controls that help define what some of the expectations are with regard to bulk in terms of scale, perceived proportions, and scale, whether it's for larger scale, such as automobiles, or human scale. And then we have sometimes specific guidelines in two forms. One, the downtown design guidelines, and then we have specific plans that have design guidelines. And so, such as the Loyola Corners, where it has architectural and color and building material guidelines. And so when we're considering bulk and the subjective nature of how that, it's inherently a subjective term, how the mass is perceived in the context, these are really the three things that are guiding us in that determination. The findings, the design controls, and the design guidelines that would apply.
Okay, so I guess the question that either you can answer or maybe Phoebe can answer, if these are the guidelines, which I actually was intimately familiar with the downtown design guidelines because I was part of the process that got us new design guidelines, as did Phoebe. If the council wants us to better describe specifically what our objections are in bulk and mass, what words should we be using?
Scale?
It could be
So-
scale, it could be proportion, it could be height as it relates to the context.
Could be volume, if
Could be
it's,
volume.
if it's the entire usable, permitted volume, end to end, back to front, and top to bottom, I think that is the 100%. And then the question is 100% of what's allowable appropriate in the context of the neighborhood?
Okay. So I would maybe take this discussion in a little bit of a different direction, because I feel, I didn't realize it sort of feels like we're just talking about semantics, right? How we approve things in a way that is coherent. Whereas I was hoping we'd have more of a philosophical discussion about what bulk and mass and, what sort of responsible land use planning should look like in that context. And I just had a couple of thoughts that I would throw out there. And if you want to discuss it, great. If you want to go back to, how to define things so that it sort of feels like if we just want to find a way to say it so that it sort of feels like.
Well, that there's basis, that we're not making it out of whole cloth.
Right.
But
One of the things that I think about when we talk about bulk and mass, and something I struggle with, is a lot of times I feel like we talk about how it has to match these older buildings, and anything new is going to look bulkier and more massive than anything old.
Good point.
And I don't know that we have, it is my strong preference that only if a building, an old building, has like really good design or like unique characteristics that make it something that you really want to see in the future, then you try to match it. Otherwise, you shouldn't be designing buildings to match the junk that it's next to that we hope will be removed. And that sometimes having a vision for the future means envisioning something that doesn't actually even exist yet in that space. So I would hate to see us say, oh, there's a small building, therefore nothing super large can go next to it. And another thing about bulk and mass is that I am under the understanding that it is an imperative for us to increase density where we can. That our housing, the stress we are putting on housing in this area and the state law is mandating us where it is appropriate to increase density. So density shouldn't be equated with bulk and mass, always. And I think a lot of times, if it's your neighborhood, that's how people, if there's density, then the neighbors see it as that's bulk and mass and that's bad. So bulk and mass gets like this umbrella for anything that is increasing density or is different or is bigger. And I think we have to philosophically come up with something different, because we actually need all those things.
You were going to say something, Jerry?
The problem is, and we all know it, is that bulk and mass are both so subjective. It's like, do you like that art over there? Yes, no. I was talking to my granddaughter today before I came here, and she said, go get the ball. And I went, which ball? She said, but the big one. Big one to her was this big. To me, a big ball. I mean, so you've hit on some key points, because I make my living in commercial real estate, and one of the things that you have to do if you're buying a property somewhere is that you must imagine what that property can be based on what the expected not only population growth is going to be, but what the architectural growth is going to be in the future. So when we're looking at something, just like you said today, undoubtedly, Loyola Corners it's not, we can't imagine that what we're doing can't be done because it doesn't conform with what is already there. Because if we did, there would be no such thing as growth. And based on where the future world is going, bulk and mass are part of the equation, and we can't escape it. So the only thing we can do with bulk and mass is see if it conforms, in my opinion, to the regulations, and see that it looks as good as it can, given the fact that it doesn't conform probably what's going to be there. So I'm not sure that this isn't something that we can say that you can put into an equation. We won't be able to tonight or any night put bulk and mass into an equation and be able to run it through a computer and say, okay, this fits the equation and it works. It's all going to be subjective. So it's a very difficult subject.
What I meant was, if you think there's a sliding scale, I agree with you that if we try and emulate what's there, we're not going to grow, and that's not what we want. This is a planning commission. We want orderly growth in a way that's comfortable. But my point is, there is an arrow. And if the arrow is pointing at 100%, where it is absolutely every cubic inch is filled in, it had better have, in my opinion, some characteristic that gives it relationship to human scale, because I think both Ranit and Jerry talked about the same thing, which is there is size in some generic way, and then there's quality. And it's possible to have a big building in an area where the buildings are mostly small, where the building itself has some inherent quality that relates to human scale. And the one I'm thinking of that we saw relatively recently is the Palo Alto Medical Center building, which was very big. Now, it had a different context because it's on a street which is mostly, but the commercial
Talking about
that's there
Los
is-
Altos Oaks?
Yeah, it's Altos Oaks. It's teeny. I mean, the scale of those is from the 1960s, and they were very underdeveloped. And yet that one managed to have a very significant volume, hovering between 80 and 100% of the maximum, but it wasn't at 100%. And it had characteristics that dealt with the other aspects that are interlocking. And you can't separate it out. But I do disagree, Jerry. I don't think bulk and mass is subjective. I think that for some people it is. But I think when we're establishing basis, when we're talking about the basis for decisions of the commission, it's not subjective. Because I think we're looking at three things simultaneously. We're looking at conformance to the various codes. We're looking for what total volume is on the site relative to the site. And then we're looking for how, within those two factors, the qualities that we're looking for that are ineffable, that are described in terms of recognizing human scale and not having big blank walls and all the things that are in the guidelines and much of our, even our neighborhood-specific plans talk about that characteristic, because that's what Los Altos is. It's comfortable for people to walk around the town.
So I want to add to that because I think I look at commercial design review like I look at residential. We have single-story houses that get replaced by two-story houses, and when people go to the maximum in terms of FAR and setbacks and put all the bulk and mass on top, we come back and say there's too much bulk and mass. And we have other designs that are more thoughtful in terms of where they place the mass. And, on an absolute volume basis, we're taking, 1,000 and 2,000 square foot houses, and they're being replaced by 3,500 and 4,000 square foot houses. And we say that's okay. We do look at materials. We look at the context of the neighborhood. But I don't see where, what we do on commercial is materially different, and I don't think it really should be. I mean, the goal is to allow for, as Phoebe says, orderly development. When you put a brick house in a residential neighborhood, that two-story brick house in a residential neighborhood where it's all one-story wood shingle houses, you have potential for creating something that looks out of place. But I think in the same context, we recognize that the buildings that replace, almost by definition, are always larger. And they are stylistically going to be different. You try and make sure that the difference works.
But do you think that you're not going to be able to come up, I don't think, I know, you're not going to be able to come up with a definition that says, okay, here's a building, throw it into the bulk and mass definition and see if it comes out okay. You're not going to be able to do that. But what you can do is you can say, just like we have with the rule, what's the FAR? Okay, here it is. What's the height? Right? What are the setbacks? I mean, the only thing we can do are write the rules that puts the property in general in a box, and then we look at the box and say, well, no, the second story should be inset a bit in order to, to eliminate or to make more obscure the mass. So I think that's the best we can ever do.
Yeah, and I have to agree. What I wrote down was that the floor area ratio, and I assume that's the size of the building compared to the lot,
Yes.
right?
Yeah.
As well as the setback of
Square
the,
footage.
Right.
Not the square footage compared to
of the floor,
floor area ratio. Yes.
right? That and the setbacks are the things we should use to describe
And height.
at buildings that we
Other than that, I don't know
do or
what else
don't
we can
like,
do.
rather than saying it's too bulky or too massive.
Right, but it's not only, it's ultimately it's where you put the massing. And, if you put your massing all in the front, if you put your massing, significant massing on the second story, significant square footage on the second story, you are more likely to create a bulk and mass issue.
And I think that's our job.
you
I
can't-
agree.
And so, and I think, this is why, the 6 or 7 of us get paid big bucks, because, it is, there are objective criteria on which you are effectively scoring. Is the scoring, is there a clear definition, what's a 1 and what's a 6? No. So there's a level of subjectivity to the scoring, but we're doing it on objective criteria.
Right?
You haven't spoken, Mike.
I just did. My thing was about floor area ratio and setbacks. I think that's the way to define things. I mean, I agree with Ronit and Jerry. I mean, everything's going to be bigger I mean, that's the way life is. And I
Life is.
don't, I mean, I don't see anybody objecting to that. What I
Frankly,
think,
it needs to be to accommodate our growing population.
absolutely.
We
What was that?
can't, it needs to be to accommodate the growing population.
Yes, it
We
has to
actually
be.
can't stop the growth, but
Right.
if we keep people from putting buildings that are like appropriately sized, what we'll get is
But,
bad planning.
right, but when you have
It
a
won't stop the growth.
300% FAR, it's like, and it, I mean, if it occupies every square inch of of a lot, I think that's where we sort of say, wait a minute, this doesn't look like a Los Altos type home, right?
Or
Looks
even,
like
I
a
mean,
different.
I disagree with John on one point. The concept of when you go to one-story to two-story residential, I think residential is in many ways different than commercial because people really identify with their homes in a much more significant way. And I think, I agree that one of the things that was quite problematic for the previous city council is the significant increase in commercial development in the downtown area. And that's an area of planning that we talked about as a concept that if we have the downtown core, which is historic and charming, if you want it to survive commercially, you have to have more intense development at the perimeter, so you get feet on the street, so you get the bodies. And that is what was built, and there are a certain percentage of people in town who are thinking that that was an error in planning. I disagree. I think it was a smart planning move, and I think it makes our town better. But that's why commercial is a little more difficult, because it's not just the listed criteria. We can say it's this high, this is what you're allowed to do. Because if that was true, we wouldn't have a design review. It would simply be construction by right. And we don't do development by right in our town because it is more than the absolute objective numbers. It's that part where there is a level of subjectivity that has to do with how does it feel relative to those qualities that define Los Altos, which is people-friendly. We can look at, we know when we do the good and bad and the ugly tour, when we've had buildings that were significantly successful. And some of them are really equally massive in the sense that they're much larger than was there before, but somehow they're able to make it work, and that's what we struggle. But it's hard for us to say, for example, to City Council, we have these 10 criteria. If it meets 8 of these 10, we pass it, because that's not how we do it. It's not cookie cutter. It's looking at each one in its development and saying, how does it fit in the overall planning of the way the town is going? And I think Altos Oaks will grow more now that the medical facility is there, because it's the leader. It says, look, I can do a big building, and I'm bringing people in, and I can park it on the site, and you can too.
I think Loyola Corners, over the last several months, has been a good example of the city interpretation from the developers of what city policy would allow. What our interpretation of what could be allowed, and what the neighbors' interpretation of what they wanted allowed. And I don't see, and as it ended up, it became so confused that we're having to re-examine the whole thing and come up with what in essence is a bulk and mass dictate to you folks. So I don't think tonight we're going to come up with anything different than
No.
what we've got.
I think that that example is going, Altos Oaks is going to have the same issue. I don't envy the first, second, or third developers that have to try to get a project through, because there's, as an example, 3 in Loyola Corners and have gotten 0.
Shut down.
And years
because, yeah,
have gone by.
right.
So Altos Oaks is going to face the same issue, because there's going to be resistance to any development in that area.
We don't know that.
Well, just drive
It's
the
a-
street. That's my
it's
neighborhood.
an
Just drive the
educated
streets.
guess.
Yeah.
You'll see. It's going to happen.
So my reason of bringing this on the agenda was to bring awareness, so that we discuss buildings, we have a more sense of, what to describe FAR setbacks, things like that, which can be more quantitative. If it's too massive on the second floor, then define that a little bit.
Well, we
better.
can practice tonight at our study session.
Exactly.
Yes, we can.
So I don't think there's a resolution. I just wanted to
No
make sure that
resolution.
everybody was aware of how we describe things. The next item was so I'm going to close that one and then go on to discussion of commission's role in transportation review. And I don't know what specifically you had in mind, David. I know it.
I was gathering that
Other than the fact that we never get anything on our agenda.
this was coming from the council's objective that we work on more transportation items in our work plan. And, I don't think we're really, from the staff perspective, I don't think we're missing anything. Because a certain amount, and I copied the charge of the commission. A great deal of the commission's work comes from the public in terms of applications, whether they're development review applications that have transportation issues, or neighborhood traffic management plans, safe routes to school. We just haven't had any of the latter in many years. And so some of the normal transportation items, this commission hasn't had the benefit of because the public hasn't applied for them. And so one of the, and so ultimately we're in an advisory role to the commission. And of course, if they ask us to study something, then we'll do that. But we need to be cautious about just generating transportation concerns. An example would be, I know this commission wants to look at traffic hotspots as an example, problematic intersections, and we need to be careful if we go down that road, because we might be studying something and terming it as a problem when it's not a problem. And if we do that, it may, for example, if we're perceiving an intersection to be problematic, but it meets all the traffic warrants and there's not an accident history and things like that, then we could be generating a liability concern. Now, here's a body going on record that something might be unsafe or something, and then that's confusing, where it may not have the benefit of the objective analysis or that sort of thing. So I wanted to have Cedric, our transportation services manager, more involved in this. And so what I want to offer, and he wasn't available tonight, he had another meeting, would be to maybe have this conversation with him present and see if there are some avenues that this commission could.
Yeah.
Can I ask a question? At what point in a neighborhood or a city traffic concern would it even get to the planning commission? Is there, because I don't know. I mean, if someone says, I live near a school and we should have a school crossing, which I would put that under transportation, would that be something that the staff would look at and solve? Okay, then at what degree does it get to when we say, okay, we need to bring it to the PTC?
There are some defined processes, such as the neighborhood traffic management plan and the safe routes to school projects, where when they reach a certain point, they're required to have the commission's input and a public forum. There's really two reasons for it, but there are. I mean, we respond to concerns all the time in terms of line of sight issues, parking, obscuring visibility on intersections, signage needs, changes to crosswalks, and we look at those, and if they meet certain objective standards that we have, then we'll make changes to them.
What about,
Just at staff level.
what about speed limits in town where, I mean, it was commented, I think it was last year when Cedric presented to city council that they wanted to raise certain streets, the speed limit, and yet everybody said, no, that's the wrong way to go. We want to actually look at traffic calming. And so that, I mean, I haven't heard anything happen after that.
Yeah, and that's a difficult area to go down because are we talking about the public's experience in terms of traffic and speeds? Or are we talking about enforceability? And depending on what we're talking about, we sometimes we can't enforce with radar, for example, unless the speed limit is within 85% of
Right.
you know, the normal travel on the street, and so we have to do surveys, and so sometimes we'll push the speed limit up so we can do radar, as an example, which isn't
It's
always
counterintuitive.
Right.
achieving the goal of, you know, let's have lower speed limits and try and enforce it differently and try and change the road configuration so people drive slower or that. So, you know, that normally those are areas where council tends to intervene there. A good example is they asked us to look at 15-mile-an-hour speed limit zones near schools. And so Cedric went and did a study. He did a couple of different schools, and I don't remember the results of that, but he reported back to them, I think, that.
But wouldn't that go to transportation? I mean, I guess that's what I think Jerry's struggling, and I'm struggling with, like, if we have this transportation element and everything goes to city council that's transportation related, then why?
I think because that didn't go anywhere, because he had to check in with them in terms of the policy, are we headed in the right direction? And they said, no, you know.
Okay.
So yes, I think that would be an example of something that would come through the commission if we were going to make a significant change in how we regulated speeds at schools.
John, you
If
have
this was
So,
instead of a PTC meeting, if this was a T meeting, we wouldn't be meeting very.
well, you know, we had this discussion at the last city council meeting, and I guess I said that the emperor had no clothes, that we really don't do transportation. You know, we do traffic-related matters related to projects, and sometimes we do them well, and sometimes we do them not as well. But we do look at the traffic impact. But I'm not convinced we really do transportation in this group. So historically, it got merged because it was a decision of the council to eliminate the traffic commission. So,
whatever. I mean,
the only way we get any transportation is if we agendize it.
right.
Okay, I mean I think that's the message.
But something would probably have to come to us as a.
Or it gets,
Sure.
or we agendize it, because we say there's something that needs to be done, and David is giving us some caveats on, looking at things that may not be problematic, that inadvertently may create some liability. So
Well, I was wondering, like, areas of concern that the traffic engineer has, just would be helpful for us to be aware, so that as we're out and about, we kind of understand what the areas of concern are, rather than all of a sudden we have a full house of people up in arms because the.
Like when the Waze app came in and all of a
Right,
sudden
exactly.
cut-throughs are coming that had never happened in town before.
Yeah, so it'd be nice to know what some of those issues were on a regular basis rather than at
Well,
a.
there was a very good report that Cedric did, I think, a couple of years ago to us, where we were talking about intersections where the level of service was terrible, and he said that's because we haven't synced to the county.
Right.
And he was working on it intersection after intersection to make sure that the county-controlled traffic lights were synced with ours, so we didn't have, you're waiting, and then all of a sudden you're stuck. And I thought that was very useful, because that was something that the public had brought up, that we discussed. Cedric looked at it, and he dealt with it. Now, the Waze app, we had no way of controlling, and we talked about that. LA was struggling with that. And we have always, John is always fond of bringing up the fact that you really can't get from 280 to 101 without going through our town. And people are not taking San Antonio Road to do it. They're cutting through the streets because it's faster. And they don't want to get caught in morning traffic, and there's not much we can do about that except we complain. But we have a small town, and there's only really one main drag, and that's it. And when it gets clogged up, people go to the streets. That was parallel. The fact is, yes, we haven't done much tea in this group, and probably we won't.
Anybody else have any comments?
No?
All right. So the resolution is to have Cedric perhaps come and discuss more about what things we could look at or
I
be
thought
aware
that
of.
might be helpful.
What's on his radar screen?
Yeah.
To define
Yeah.
some areas that we might pursue.
We always like seeing Cedric.
Yeah.
He's good as-
Well,
So
and just on that note, right, Covington and Grant, they've started to do some of the work to get ready to enlarge that intersection or to follow whatever was approved. I mean, I've just been watching it as it happens.
yes, we're redoing that intersection without signals.
Right. But it went all through. We all saw it. It got approved by council. Now they're doing the work. Great. Okay. Next item I have is commissioner reports and comments. I don't know who was assigned to go to what meetings.
I went to, or I listened to parts of the most recent city council meeting on
Tuesday the 13th.
Tuesday, the 13th. There was nothing of significance. The only interesting trivia was a denial of a tree removal permit that came up on appeal. And that was just an interesting discussion. If you want amusement, I encourage you to watch the 10 minutes of discussion.
Did they deny it or approve it?
I'm sorry, they denied.
They upheld.
They
They
upheld
upheld
the
the
denial
denial.
of the removal of a very large coastal oak.
Okay.
Anything else? So one thing I have from the last meeting that I said I would do, which is I asked staff to pull the 2014 and 2015 permits, and I would look at a section of them, look at 32 homes that had permits pulled, that as to what the shoulder paving area. What was interesting is out of those 32 homes, 13 homes hadn't even been started.
I'm sorry, it's there.
13 homes had not even been started.
They had the permit, but they hadn't started construction.
They hadn't started construction. 13 homes were under construction. So out of the 20, that's 26. 4 had completed, but they are haven't. So I'll explain in a minute. But they have cement swales. One had a brick wall with no change, and one did not comply. What I noticed in town was that there are a large number of neighborhoods that have this concrete swale that was put in. And I don't know quite what happened when, but essentially there are sections, and I would say, I'm guessing about maybe a half to 2/3 that there is no,
It's the rolled curb you're talking about?
it's a swale, it goes up. The properties are above the street,
Ah.
and so they filled in this concrete section, and I would say about a third to a half of the neighborhoods are that way. There is a couple of challenges with that in that some streets stop and then it's flat. So all that water starts running down that street in those culverts and then go into flat. And one property that's on Cherry and Yerba
Buena?
Yerba Buena, I took a picture to give to staff, which all the water from the street actually floods. I mean, I hate to see if it really rained, it would flood the yard. And we talked to the owner's mom, and she said they had to sandbag when it got really bad because the water would go into their house. I mean, it's on a low spot of where the water would flow. With that observation, or I had several observations that I'm not sure if our commission is the right one to deal with it, but I thought I'd bring them up. And I sent a note to David about this, which was the storm drains that are in these areas are getting all the debris from these areas that don't have, concrete around them. So maybe a barrier around it would help to protect the drain from getting loose sediment, bark, anything else that's on that street, rocks, because if all that water is rushing down, it's just going to carry stuff with it. So that was one observation. One is that 3-foot swale, I'm wondering if it could be impervious material rather than just pervious, because a
Wait,
lot of,
concrete is impervious.
it's impervious. I mean, making it pervious.
You want to have it,
Because something like rock, I saw a couple of places where they actually put in rocks. And it actually made sense, you know, and we've changed our policy over, I don't know what happened, but we're now looking at catch basins along the sides of roads to catch the water as it comes off the street. The recent example is the one on Fremont, or not on Fremont, on Homestead, where we dug out that area and so that the water could drain from the street into the ground and then percolate down. I know a number of buildings we do that too. We say, can you make that lower and make a catch basin? So I'm wondering if we might want to encourage that in the neighborhoods, rather than saying you must put pervious concrete
Okay.
something on a 3-foot section of swale so that the water can continue, but rather say, if you want, it's an option. So that was another thought or that was an observation. There was some pervious material pervious material that looked like it was compacted, and I'm not sure if that's part of the guideline. Whether it could be bark or rock instead. It looked like it was almost concrete, but it was crushed granite that had looked like stuff in it. The other question I had was, is there grandfathering of stuff? So if somebody put asphalt for 8 feet up to their side of the road, and now they do construction, does that now have to be pulled out so that it's a 3-foot area, or whether that has to be, it can be left alone? I think I would like to see, well, I know I'd like to see the grandfathering provision removed so that we're trying to fix these wide streets, that there are certain streets that they've put asphalt a good 8 feet on each side. And so these streets that would be normally narrow are now really large and look quite not the Los Altos character that I think a lot of people enjoy.
And there are no trees typically. either,
Exactly.
Which it's in some sense, it's the asphalt just exacerbates, or the lack of trees just exacerbates.
Exactly, and especially with water quality, there's a report from LA that talks about they're trying to capture the water and not let the water go into the storm basins, into the creeks, out to the ocean, to rather have it percolate back into the ground. The last question I had was, if the policy is creating damage for another homeowner downstream, is the city liable to fix the damage? I don't know, but I just saw a number of cases where the water is rushing from what this policy is doing into areas that haven't been changed, and it's causing erosion, could be flooding from that one house, for example.
Yeah, I had, Cedric was able to respond to these questions.
Okay.
So if you want, I can kind of read his comments, if you think that
Sure.
helps.
Yeah.
So with regard to the barriers around the storm drains, he was noting that typically only do that when there's erosion control issues and there's straw wattles or something. They're sandbags and they're temporary.
But there's one over on Portola that's permanent, or Portland.
When it's not a tripping hazard or something, then they can do other measures like that. But
Okay.
most of our storm drains are in the walkway or in the street shoulder in there.
I would argue not, because
So-
out of the sample of what I did in that neighborhood, and maybe it's just that neighborhood and the rest of the town is different, but that neighborhood, there was a lot of them that were in the dirt, away from the roadway.
Well, they are, if they're in the street shoulder though, that is still the public way.
City right-of-way.
And so the
Okay.
concern is if there's a tripping hazard there,
Gotcha. Okay.
that's the city's issue. And so typically, he said when we put debris barriers in, we put them inside the storm drains. And some of them are designed for that, but those are very maintenance intensive.
I bet.
And so we don't have very many of those. With regard to the swale being optional, he's seeing the swale as really being integral to this policy, helps define the edge of the road. When there is no hard edge,
I don't follow that, because the policy says from the edge of the road 3 foot into the property.
or 3 feet into the shoulder.
Into into the city right away, right?
So what we have is a unretained asphalt edge
Okay,
that's irregular. And so, one of the benefits of the policy he's indicated is that it helps provide a uniform edge and helps protect the edge of the street. But it also helps convey the water because we do have storm drains periodically. And that's where we want the water to go. He noted that the material needs to be compacted if it's going to be in the shoulder. It can't be bark or gravel that's going to be tracked out into the roadway. That could be a tripping hazard or cause pollution in some ways. It just gets combined with the runoff. The grandfathering provision, he noted that this policy only applies to certain streets with undefined shoulders. So in the neighborhoods where they have this concrete suburban gutter, the rounded
right?
concrete gutter, it doesn't apply there. It doesn't apply on routes that are designated as safe routes to school, for example.
So what happens when it's cement on one side and nothing on the other? Is it on the, is it the, I mean, rather than the street, it's, what you're saying is, depends on what's existing.
Depends on what's existing, right?
Right.
And,
But if they've taken that shoulder and gone 8 feet because they've paved it back 20 years ago, and now somebody comes along and says, we want to,
yeah, and I think that's an area that we could point out to him, because I think that was your intention of the question.
right,
Let's say on Angela, for example, where there's just several properties in a row that have paved what was an unimproved shoulder, and you know, we could figure out some way to contact property owners.
Well, there are two pieces to this that I'd like to add in. One is that most homeowners don't realize where the edge of their property is, because most people think the edge of the property is the road, and in fact, often the city right-of-way can be as much as 15 feet inboard from that.
exactly.
So that's one piece. The second is that the state-adopted Green Building Code talks a lot about maintaining your water on your property. And so I think that's a piece that could be parlayed into what you're talking about, is that if you're looking at development and there is existing paving and it's in the city right-of-way and it's not supporting the green building mandates at this point, the city has a little more leverage if they want to say, look, you have to control the water on your property and this is not your property. I think that's where it comes in. It's often a shock, I find, when I point out to people that their property line is not, that's not your property.
Yeah. Well, that's a good point, because I've noted that around town, there's a lot of people that are putting signs on the city's right-of-way when I thought, well, that's the city's right-of-way. How can they put a sign in?
Yeah,
Doesn't that violate some ordinance somewhere? Anyway,
yes, it does.
Yeah.
And in election season, we'll see more.
yeah.
And he also notes that they don't apply this policy when there's a low point in the street, or sag, that they would,
That's fine.
the engineers look at that and, because they understand that at some point it does create a problem, and they don't want to exacerbate that. They aren't aware, he said he wasn't aware of any areas where they were, except on Milverton, where there was such a drainage concern, so
I took a photo of it.
yeah, so.
I'll be happy
Pass
to.
that along to me, please.
Sure, do you want it to you or Suzanne? I was talking to at the council meeting.
Either,
Okay.
yeah. Well, I would like to be copied just so I can
I'll send it to both of you guys.
track it with Cedric.
Yeah, I just wanted, it happens to be that the shoulder on the right, if you're looking that way, it starts off with concrete. The next person put asphalt. Then this property has nothing, and the storm drain's on the other side of the street. So the water, I mean, I don't know what it looks like, but I can envision it. It just comes down that side of the street and then it goes right into the person's yard, into their driveway. And if there's a lot of rain, I don't know how it gets out of there quickly.
Well, actually, there's another one on University Avenue, just east of El Monte. I remember walking when it rained here some years ago and meeting a property owner who pointed out that all of the water in the street was rolling right into their yard by the way things were graded. And I suggested they go in and talk to people in the city. I have no idea what happened.
Okay, but I'll forward that
Milverton
to-
is not unique. It's more than one place. And this year, we're probably going to find a lot more, I hope.
Well, I did find like one storm drain that was full of leaves. And of course, in a drought, nobody cares, but if it starts raining, that's going to create a flood, I'm sure.
Yeah, and our service guys are out there maintaining all the storm drains.
Yeah, this is like a,
The last 2 months, they've been out there cleaning them up.
Okay.
So we do that every year in advance of the rain. We hope we are getting some more rain.
so if water's the issue, is that something Environmental Commission should look at as far as trying to maintain the water, or is that
Well-
part of our?
I mean, there's in areas where we have significant redevelopment, we are applying the shoulder paving policy if engineering allows us to pull back that extra paving that is adding to the runoff. The other thing I was noting that the regional water permit, the state is discussing new runoff regulations, where now we just take the runoff from the road and dump it into the creek, and that's, as long
Right.
as we do that and there's no trash in it, that's okay.
Right.
But they're changing, they're improving the standard so that we have to treat that water.
Capture
And
and
so,
filter it. Yeah.
one of the ways will be catching it along the street, and we don't have those standards. I mean, the state's working on that. So eventually, I think, he thinks we are going to get there within the next, if it's the next 5 years, I don't know.
Okay, so as the things change, then we'll see that, or?
Yes, we would see a new standard, and then we would advise
This is back
council
to
on
the
that.
T.
And I think we would certainly run it through this commission if we're gonna change that kind of a
Or
standard.
environmental.
Yeah, that's why I wasn't sure whether this is more an environmental issue, because it is about the quality of the water and getting back in the earth and not really
It is, but it's,
transportation.
the state's regulating it.
Okay.
We don't really have a say in it, and we don't want to create a standard that then we may have to undo. And also, it's a bit tricky when you're retaining water right next to the edge of the street. We can undermine the street, and
Right.
then that's, a problem in itself. So,
Okay. Any questions? All right, any other potential future agenda items?
Yep. Would like to encourage us to do the good, the bad, and the ugly. There were a number of projects that we didn't include the last time we did that. Those projects, particularly on First Street and at least one or two on State, are now complete. And it'd be good to do that. Whether, there's an interesting question as to whether we look at it de novo or we look at it in the context of some of the recommendations that are coming from the Downtown Design Committee. But I think it would be good to look at it because, we're relatively good at trying to be retrospective and see what we did well and see what
Sure.
areas we could improve. So that requires three of us to agree to do it.
David has a comment before we.
I meant to make a comment on the earlier bulk discussion. We are going to be having a study session on November 5th with the Downtown's Buildings Committee, which is council's committee that's looking at our recent development in downtown. So I think this conversation, I think, might be interesting to have
So,
after we see where that downtown
Yeah.
committee is. Those committee, so this committee is going to be presenting some ideas to this commission as a study session on the 5th. And then following up soon after with a formal meeting with this commission to receive a recommendation from this commission to council on whether the subcommittee's ideas are desired by this commission or not, or recommended to the city council for pursuit. And so I think as part of that process, it might help kind of calibrate what some of the concerns might be in terms of, and then we follow with a design tour. It might be, I'm thinking better in that context.
Oh, you see, I guess I was thinking that I wasn't aware of the November 5th meeting, but it seems to me that it would be helpful before the November 5th meeting for us to at least go around and look at the buildings, because, I mean, my understanding is they went around, they looked at all the new developments in town, and then based on that, they formulated some recommendations. I would feel a little naked listening, having a joint or a study session with them if I hadn't at least done the same.
Didn't we do that? I mean.
Yeah, I mean,
Do we have a list of the buildings that they went, I mean, I was on the walking tour that the mayor, I mean, the then mayor was
That's
running.
what I was going to suggest is maybe I can obtain those records again about, because that's what spurred that committee.
Right.
Was
that
Right.
walk?
Right.
was that the
Megan.
mayor's walk.
I
They
did-
looked
I
at a
did that.
specific
So
list,
did
I
I.
believe.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, and they have a cheat sheet, if you will, on each project, and so that might be helpful.
So with
I
this-
can distribute that.
with the study session, aren't they going to list all the buildings that they looked at ahead of time?
Maybe.
They may show some as an example. I'm not sure of their format.
Yeah.
But they have a number of recommendations with regard to.
I'm just wondering if it could be part of the packet, or if you want to send it beforehand, that'd be fine.
That's basically what I think we're asking.
Yeah, I
Give us
think
a
in
little heads up.
advance, I will, if not,
Because we're only like 2 weeks away.
yeah, if not tomorrow, on Monday, I will send that dossier of the mayor's walk. And I think that'll give you the background
All
that
right.
they had, which then spurred their own.
So if this is going to come, because their recommendations at some point are going to come to us, does that preclude us from having a good, bad, and ugly session about,
Well, the next
Just-
meeting is that meeting.
Well, but the point is that they're looking at buildings relative to the mayor's walk, which was now almost 2 years ago. It was quite, I mean, Megan was mayor then, and Jan's been mayor for at least a year, maybe more, so.
Just here.
Yeah, there were two versions of the walk.
Ah,
And so it was the latest walk.
so what I was going to suggest is John's pointing out there are more buildings that have been completed since then. And so I don't see them as mutually exclusive, but I don't think we have time to do the good, the bad, and the ugly before we
Before.
have the next meeting,
Right.
which
Well,
is
that's-
the next meeting in November.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And my thought was to at least listen to what they want to say, then go out, if we go out and look at buildings, that you're going to be looking at them with their context of, do I agree with it, not agree with it?
the reason I raise it is because I've always found that us looking at buildings and then discussing them, not with the purpose of necessarily
Right.
changing guidelines, but talking
Oh, I
about them.
agree.
It's always great to hear each of the commissioners' view and perspective, because overall, that makes us more aware and sensitive to different issues.
I actually shared that with another city's staff who I met. We were talking about planning, and I said, we did this tour, and they said, what a great idea. So I'm very much for it.
Okay.
Well, I think peer review is very helpful.
Yeah. But it's just, I think if the timing is going to be hard because I think the building commission's coming up before us quicker than we can
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
react to anything.
So you have to close this meeting. to do
So
the
is there anything else? Do we need to get, we need 3 people? I don't know, I guess I'm kind of at a loss. Do you need anything else from us? Is the fact that John mentioned it and we're interested, do you need 3 of us to say, yes, we'd like to see it?
There's an implied majority, I think.
Okay.
Okay.
So we'll get
It's just the
agendized.
timing of it.
Yes.
Well, it may be after the new year at this point.
Yeah, so I think that's what we need to discuss.
Okay.
subsequently.
Well, I know that,
I'll put it on as a future agenda.
so I do know that the city manager's been wanting to talk to me about what's going to be happening when with our agendas. I'm waiting to hear from her. The second thing, I was approached by a council member about doing a joint study session with the building subcommittee, and I don't know what happened. They were going to talk about it on Tuesday.
Is that not what, that's for the November 5th meeting?
And will they be part of that?
No, it's not.
It's not a joint meeting.
Council, although the
Ah.
council certainly can come. This is a study session between PTC and the buildings committee.
Because the city council was.
For them to present their findings.
And
Okay.
we have informed council, it's gonna be in Neutra, so it'll be an informal setting, and certainly there's enough room to, the public can join, the council can join.
Okay.
Will they be instead of a regularly scheduled meeting, or?
It's instead.
Okay,
Okay.
good.
Anything else? I will close the PTC meeting.